The coronation. I think that would be an even bigger mistake.
O sucesso do filme O Discurso do Rei, entre críticos e público, desperta mais uma vez o intrigante culto à monarquia britânica. Uma instituição que fascina muitos e enfurece outros, mais inclinados a vê-la enterrada. A mistura de história, conto de fadas, celebridade e telenovela que se desenrola nas Ilhas Britânicas contamina também outros países, onde um público estrangeiro e criado em culturas diferentes se deixa levar também por narrativas pitorescas, como as do rei gago Jorge VI.
My physicians say it relaxes the throat.
Antes disso, o drama de um antecessor que enlouqueceu no trono e perdeu a colônia americana. Rainhas virgens e poderosas, soberanas mais contemporâneas que resistem a mostrar emoção diante de tragédias. Ou dinastias salpicadas de ginástica de alcova que fazem sucesso na TV.
She's a cheap nothing.
Sem esquecer das princesas de verdade, glamorosas. Rivais sem glamour. Príncipes envelhecendo em eterna espera para herdar a coroa da coroa.
My lords, pray be seated.
Ou herdeiros coroados que largam o trono para casar com a mulher amada, divorciada e estrangeira, em trama digno de telenovela. O culto à monarquia como celebridade vai se agravar ainda mais em abril, quando o príncipe William, segundo na linha do trono, se casar com a plebeia Kate Middleton. Uma cerimônia que promete alcançar altos índices de audiência na TV pelo mundo, em clima de conto de fadas. E nova festa no ano que vem, quando a Rainha Elizabeth II completa 60 anos no trono. Encantam-se os fãs, irritam-se os que veem na monarquia uma instituição obsoleta, retrógrada, cara, perdulária, elitista, fútil e, sobretudo, antidemocrática, porque não eleita. É o caso da organização britânica Republic, que defende o fim da monarquia e sua substituição por uma república, com um chefe de Estado eleito em vez de escolhido por herança. O governo executivo ainda em mãos do parlamento, como hoje. O principal dirigente desse grupo de pressão, Grahan Smith, conversou com o Milênio em Londres.
So here we have another hit film about the British monarchy, as so many others before. And then we'll be having the wedding of Prince William this year. So royal fever is back, as it has happened in the past. Why this fascination with the British royal family, with royal families in general, with monarchy in general?
Well, I think it kind of has a place in the imagination. It's historic. It's sort of fairy tales and Disney and that sort of thing, and it's also caught up these days in the sort of wider celebrity culture. And you know, they are wealthy and they present themselves as this sort of prestigious family. And I think on the whole they've been quite successful in terms of separating themselves out away from their constitutional position. So they've kind of avoided being tarred with the same brush as politicians, for example. So it's kind of a hyped up version of celebrity, and as a kind of a fairy tale idea, it's got some attraction, and I think that's true of everybody. But there will always be that interest. But it's interesting that you get that interest from right around the world, whether you're living in republics or monarchies. So it has nothing to do with any kind of political idea or philosophy or sort of views on the monarchy itself. It is simply a kind of a cultural expression or an idea about fairy tales and fantasy rather than anything serious.
Of course, for Republicans and anti-monarchists in general, the idea of monarchy looks very old-fashioned, very obsolete. But then you look at some of the countries that still have a monarchy today, from Britain to the Netherlands to Scandinavia, and these are very modern countries. So it looks anachronistic, but at the same time you're dealing with countries that are very modern. So there's no contradiction there then.
Well, there is a contradiction, and that's kind of the issue. I mean, we've got Republican movements in all of these countries now in Europe. I mean, we've recently, 6 months ago, formed an alliance of European Republican movements. So it's an issue which is being looked at right across the European monarchies. And I think it does jar because we are modern, cosmopolitan, forward-looking countries, and yet there are these institutions that attempt to sort of impose themselves on our sort of national psyche and on our national identity in a way that is inappropriate. So, and it's particularly strong, I think, in this country, where we are constantly being told that we are a sort of a backward-looking country, or a traditionalist country, or that we all love the royals, or that we don't necessarily value democracy, for example. And this is all coming from the fact that we have an institution that is there, is very prevalent, and also has an interest in perpetuating itself. So it continues to sort of promote these ideas. So it does jar with who we really are, and this is one of the reasons why I want to get rid of it, because we want to get a system which actually represents and reflects who we are, rather than a system that tries to sort of keep us locked in the past.
If we look at the international impact of the British monarchy, besides the popularity, besides the soap opera and the celebrity factor, the Queen is the head of state of quite a few countries in the Commonwealth,
yeah.
Former British colonies and all that. And a lot of these countries kept her as a head of state when, other than America, the United States got rid of it, of the monarch. A lot of other countries still keep her. Isn't that strange? They had the opportunity to do it and they didn't do it.
Well, I mean, the Commonwealth has got more than 50 countries in it, and only 14 of them still have the Queen as their head of state. So most Commonwealth countries are republics, and I think it's fair to say that the countries that have been more stable and prosperous and have managed to become democratic peacefully and without too much trouble have not seen the need to necessarily make that final step.
Canada, Australia.
Exactly, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and some of the small Caribbean countries that also have maybe a little bit of a one eye on the United States, who are very close neighbours. But obviously all the other countries have had a harder time making that transition from being colonial possessions to being independent states. I think have made a much more decisive break from the past and become republics. But I mean, you see Republican movements in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Most Australians want to get rid of the monarchy. New Zealanders, it's almost half and half split. It depends on what poll you ask, but I mean, I think that when you get towards the succession and the Queen dying, Charles becoming king, you start to see support for the Republic moving upwards.
We should perhaps remind our viewers that the monarchy is obviously not just the Queen, her husband, and a few princes. It's the whole structure of a royal family here. How large is that?
Well, I mean, it's more than just the royal family. It's the constitution. I mean, it is our political system. But in terms of the royal household, we are talking mainly about the sort of 15, 16 royals who are given, the Royal Highness title, and who go out and do things in terms of, opening hospitals or cutting ribbons or whatever it is they do.
And get money from the state.
Most of them will get some kind of subsidised travel or accommodation or whatever. So, and more people beyond that 15 will also get subsidised accommodation through palaces and homes and so on. But I mean, it then goes beyond those 15 to also all of the people that work in the royal household as well. So it's quite a large operation. A lot of people work both in the palaces and also in their private homes, supporting the royal family. So it is
who pays
quite
for
large.
that? You do?
The British taxpayer. Yeah, I mean the British taxpayer pays For almost all of it, and they try and avoid. I mean, we've got these sort of landed estates called the duchies, Duchy of Lancaster, Duchy of Cornwall, which provide money for the Queen and for Charles. And we're talking, 10, 20 million pounds a year. And so they claim that, because they're getting money through these duchies, and that, that's their own money being spent. But I mean, that money would also be taxpayers' money. If we got rid of the monarchy, those duchies would be state property. So I mean, all of this money is going towards the royal family and maintaining the monarchy, which would otherwise go to the treasury and to the country if we got rid of the monarchy.
Your movement, your anti-monarchy movement, what would you do to all these people? You want to give them jobs? You want them to have a life like anybody else?
Yeah, I mean,
the horror.
Well, we're Democrats, and we believe that everyone should be treated equally. So if we became a republic, they would all be citizens like the rest of us, and they would be expected to look after themselves, pay taxes, get jobs if they needed to. It would be unlikely that they needed to, because they're quite independently wealthy without any help from us. So they would just be allowed to, go and live the high life and enjoy their lives.
But the Queen does have here one extraordinary power that other monarchs don't have. She's the head of the church.
Yeah.
That's a very important function, isn't it? She's above the Archbishop of Canterbury.
Yeah, I mean, actually, we have a state church. So, I mean, in a sense, our monarch has enormous powers that other monarchs don't have. I mean, most monarchs in Europe are very, they've got written constitutions, and they've had it written down that there are very strict limits on what the monarch can do. And in many of them, like Sweden, there's almost nothing that the monarch can do. In this country, the Queen is, as you say, the head of church, and therefore she makes all appointments to the church. But she's also the head of state, and therefore makes all appointments to the state. So she would appoint Prime Minister and all ministers. And if she refuses to do so, there's nothing that anybody can do about it without Parliament actually getting rid of the monarchy.
It doesn't happen in practice, but it could happen.
It could happen, and it has happened. It has happened. I mean, it's very rare, and certainly in sort of modern, and I'm talking in the last 30, 40 years, it doesn't really happen very often. But the Queen has, for example, appointed prime ministers of her own choosing. And this happened because the Conservative Party back in the 50s and 60s didn't have internal elections for leader. People kind of emerged, through backroom deals. And there were two prime ministers who were appointed by the Queen on the advice of people that had no business advising her. And that caused some concern within the Tory party, which is why they then chose to start electing their leader, so it was absolutely clear who it should be. But I mean, if she could dissolve Parliament, and there's nothing that anyone can do about it, she could sack the Prime Minister, she could appoint anybody else as Prime Minister, and she can refuse to allow a law to go into, to go onto the statute books. So there's all these things that she could do, and she's unlikely to do it. I think the danger is that someone like Charles, for example, as king, may be tempted to at least threaten in private to use some of these powers. Let's say, for example, we've got a Conservative government which is sympathetic to the monarchy and wishes to do it no harm. Now the monarch has private, secret meetings with the Prime Minister every week. It's not impossible to imagine that King Charles may say to the Prime Minister who is proposing to do something which he disapproves of, he may say, look, I can make your life difficult, I've got the power to do that, so I want you to change this policy, and no one will ever be any the wiser.
So the idea, the concern that you have is, although people say, well, the monarch is harmless because the Queen or the eventual king doesn't have any power, what you're saying is that, well, in fact, they do have it.
Yeah.
The Queen has chosen not to exercise it,
yeah.
But the power is there.
Absolutely right. And I mean, it is, we're not suggesting that we're heading for a crisis where King Charles acts on these powers, but we're saying that there is a danger that he can exert influence because he has them. And also, on the flip side, there is a job to be done by the head of state, and the head of state ought to be able to advise and warn the Prime Minister if they think that they're going down a particular road, and they ought to be able to make decisions about dissolving Parliament if there is a political crisis of some kind. But it's not a job that the monarch can do, and shouldn't be able to do, because they're not accountable for those decisions if they get them wrong. So we want someone who can do those things and then be held to account for the decisions they make.
To the south, I present to you Elizabeth,
your undoubted queen.
Your reforming plans, the group you had, the Republic, opposed the monarchy, you want to change the current situation, and but you want to create what?
Well, we want a basic democratic republican Britain. So we want to have, it's not sort of grandiose or ostentatious. It's just very straightforward republican constitution that says that the people are in charge. It's our democratic country, and we're going to run things. We will have politicians, but we'll put limits on their power, and we'll have a head of state who's elected by us to act independently to protect the constitution and to serve certain basic functions. So we're looking at a constitutional head of state. We're not looking at a president like you might have in Brazil or in the United States. They wouldn't have any political power. They wouldn't be making political decisions. They would be taking constitutional decisions. So, for example, if Parliament chooses to pass a law which the President decides is unconstitutional, the President can refuse to allow it to go through, and it would then go to a court to be judged. If Parliament is a hung Parliament and they can't decide who the Prime Minister ought to be, the President can act as a referee. So it's very straightforward, very practical, pragmatic sort of republic, and it just simply gives us a head of state who's chosen by us and has a function.
So it's like a president more in the lines of the president in Germany and in Italy,
and
rather
Ireland,
than the
Republic of
president in
Ireland,
France or Brazil or the United States.
Absolutely. So it's very simple, very functional sort of role.
Dealing with the head of state, the function of the head of state, as you say, you would prefer to have a weak presidential type. Those who defend the monarchy and the queen as a head of state, or the eventual king, say that the fact that they don't have any clear party political association is a plus. What do you think?
It would be a plus if the Queen did anything. This is the thing. I mean, this is the kind of the fallacy of this argument, is that if she had any function, if she was able to act independently of the Prime Minister, then her apparent impartiality might be a plus. But as she hands all her powers to the Prime Minister, then it's irrelevant. It doesn't make any difference. I mean, what we want is someone who is not only impartial, but can be seen to be impartial and can be held to account for that impartiality, which is another key point. We don't actually know how impartial the Queen is, because we don't know anything about her. She never does an interview. She would never sit here opposite you answering questions about what she did and why she did it. And she has these secret meetings, and so we don't know what she's doing behind closed doors. We don't know how she feels about the different political parties, and we can't hold her to account if she did make a decision that was inappropriate. So, but the key thing is that she doesn't really get involved, so it makes no difference whether she's impartial. With an elected head of state, you can still have an impartial person in post, even if they've got a party political career behind them. And we see this in Britain already with the Speaker of the House of Commons. The Speaker is expected to be impartial, and by and large always is impartial. And yet they are an elected MP that has already served many years.
He represents a party.
Exactly. So as soon as they become Speaker, they leave the party and they become an independent MP as Speaker. And there's no reason why a similar figure couldn't take on the role of Head of State. But we'd also be able to see their impartiality, judge it, and hold them to account for it.
What would you do with the Head of State, the Queen or eventually King Charles? Guillotine is out of the way, hanging is out of the way.
We're a democratic, peaceful organisation. As I said before, we simply want to, it's about freeing us and also freeing them. They would be freed of their obligations and free to pursue whatever life they choose as equal citizens, and we would also be free to then choose their successor.
Where do you see the support for the Republican cause in this country? Do you have signs that that's growing?
Well, I think that the support for the monarchy is softening and is changing. I think people are sort of becoming a little bit, a lot more critical of the institution and a lot more reluctant to simply go along with it and be sycophantic and be deferential. It's not necessarily transferring into solid support for being a republic yet. What it is paving the way is sort of preparing the ground really for a very solid debate. So we can see that it will, there's a lot of space there in the opinion polls for us to move into and sort of build a majority around what we want. And where that comes from is right across the political spectrum, right across the social spectrum. So you have people on the right and on the left and in the middle, of all ages and walks of life, who are starting to sort of come around to the idea that it's a viable option. Which again is a big change from 30 years ago. It was very much a left-wing issue 30 years ago, and that's no longer the case.
But on the other side, the monarchists, they kind of think you guys, Republicans, are just a bunch of strange commies, leftists, anarchists. Are you all that?
No, not at all. I mean, you know, in fact, I think Republicans have perhaps a slightly similar dismissive view of monarchists. I mean, when you're talking about monarchists as a group, we're not really talking about the majority of the country. We're talking about a minority of people who are ardent monarchists. They will go out and defend it. They will argue. They will join organisations, and they will, you know, follow the Queen on Twitter, for example, and take a real interest. But that's also a minority. And then you've got a minority of Republicans. You've got a whole load of people in the middle who just probably look at both sides and think, well, you know, toss a coin, I don't know which to support. You know, but as I said, they'll go along with keeping the monarchy simply because they've not given it any great thought, and why change something that you've not thought about. So, you know, as Republicans are concerned, we are right across the political and social spectrum, and the people that certainly run the Republic are as mainstream as everyone else, and perfectly intelligent, educated, professional people that want to have a democratic country.
So you were born and raised in this atmosphere with all these traditions that you know, intellectually are rejecting now. But as a citizen, as someone that came from this background, when you look at next year, for instance, the Jubilee of the Queen, she's going to be in power for 60 years. There will be celebrations of all kinds. What are you going to do?
Well, we're going to be.
You're going to participate?
We're going to be campaigning. I mean, this is what we're going to be campaigning at the wedding as well. We're holding our own street parties and meetings. So we take every opportunity because we see these events as being not national events, but monarchy events. They're events that are designed to perpetuate myths and to promote the institution. And certainly next year, when we come around to the 60th anniversary, our key message essentially will be, you know, we've had 60 years of one person taking for granted that she's going to be head of state, never asking us, never putting it to a vote, never suggesting that the people might have a say. And then also, it also means that we're getting closer and closer to Charles doing the same thing. And are we really going to sit back and say to Charles, you can just walk through the gates of Buckingham Palace, become our head of state without asking? You know, we want to have that discussion, and we want the people to be able to choose who that's going to be. So it's an opportunity to remind people that actually this is a bizarre institution that should not perpetuate for another 60 years. And, you know, as I said before, the monarchy survives on people not thinking about it. And these big set-piece events only help to get people to think about it, and therefore help our campaign.
Graham, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Se vocês quiserem mais informações sobre essa entrevista e outras do Milênio, acessem o blog do Milênio no site da Globo News.
Too late, too late.